All right, so I'm in Visual Studio Code. I have a folder here named prerequisite review. I'm going to make a file named Program1.java. Make a main method. All right, so we can start. So the first thing we want this program to do is get two numbers from the user. They could have a decimal point. So just two numbers from the user, and we want to find the maximum of those two numbers, the largest of the two. All right, so in order to get numbers from the user, we need to have a scanner to read the keyboard input. And since we're reading from the keyboard, we're going to put system.in over here when we create the scanner. All right, so we are going to ask the user. First, we need to import scanner. So we shall say here, import java.util scanner. Now I should just note very quickly, we don't actually need to import ever. Importing is actually never really necessary. And I'll show you what I mean. If we want to, we can just say Java scanner. So every time we say the word scanner, we could prefix it with Java util scanner. Now, of course, yeah. So in other words, the point is that the real name of scanner is not scanner. It's java.util.scanner or util, not scanner. Anyways, so it's really the full name of this scanner is this java.util.scanner. But Java allows us as a shortcut to not have to type out this part, right? So we could leave off the java.util part and instead import java.util.scanner, right? So all importing does is it lets you abbreviate your code a little bit. That's really all import does. It doesn't move any file. It doesn't, nothing really happens except that it's a shortcut. Okay, so so now that we have the scanner, we can ask the user to enter two numbers. Okay, and I'll make it print. I want to just be on this line. So we'll get so we asked the user for two numbers. So now the user is going to type in two numbers. So we're going to read them in here as num1 equals sc.next. So it might be a double, right? It might have a decimal. So I'm going to use sc.next double, and same thing for num2. I'll read it in using the next double method. All right. So now I want to find the maximum of these two numbers. So I'm going to write a separate method to find the maximum of two numbers. So it's going to be public static double. It's going to return the maximum, which is a double. Max, call this method max. And there are two parameters. So they're going to be, let's say, double A and double B. Okay, and we're going to have to write the method, but let me just show you how we call the method. So we're going to call the method by saying max and sending it num1 and num2. And of course, the max method is going to return a result. So we want to store that result. So I'll say double, let's say large, whatever, maximum is going to be assigned the result of calling the max method. Okay, so when Java does this line 11, it will first call the max method, do the entire method, and when the method returns a result, Java will take that result and put it into this maximum variable. And then we could print out the maximum. So we can say maximum of the two numbers is, and then we'll put the maximum. All right, so that's pretty nice. All right, next. Okay, so next we actually have to write the max method. So how will we do this? So one easy way to do it is like this, right? So if A is if A is greater than B, yes. So what does that mean? Well, if A is greater than B, then which one is the max? Which one of the two is the max? Obviously A. So return A. And then otherwise, right? So in other words, if A is not greater than B, then which one is the max? Then B must be max. Now, what happens if A and B are equal? What's going to happen? Well, which case are we going to do? Are we going to do the if case, or are we going to do the else case? Well, we're probably going to do the else case. Probably. Well, yes. Because A is not greater than B, so we're going to do this. So we're going to return B, but since they're equal, we could return either A or B. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, so I think we took care of all possibilities here. So this works. This method works. Let's just test it. So we could go open a new terminal and go ahead and compile. And run. Okay, so it asks for two numbers, so we can put, let's say, 5.5 and I don't know, 4.7. Okay, so which one is the max? So it says the maximum of two numbers is 5.5. So that's correct. Okay, so that's good. Now let me just show you that we can actually write this method much more concisely. Okay, so I'm going to comment out these lines, and instead I will write the following. I will say one line, return. Well, actually, let's do it first in two lines. I'll say double largest is going to be assigned the following. So here, what I'm going to do is use something called a conditional expression. Sorry, not a conditional expression. I'm sorry. I'm going to use the conditional operator. That's what I want. Conditional operator. And here's what it looks like. So I'm going to say A greater than B, question mark. If yes, right, if A is greater than B, then the value that I want to return is A. Otherwise, this colon means otherwise, the value that I want to return is B. Okay, so what's happening here is that we're going to assign a value to this largest variable. Okay, now the question is what value should be assigned to this variable? So the way Java will determine that is by first checking this condition. If the condition is true, then the value Java will use is A. So the value of A will be assigned to this variable. If this condition is false, right, so if A is not greater than B, then the value of B will be taken and assigned to largest. But the point is, at the end of this line, largest will contain the value of the largest number. And then we can just return the largest. Now, of course, we can actually do this even more concisely in just one line. Right? So we can simply say return and then say the following. Is A greater than B? Question mark. If yes, return A. Otherwise, return B. Okay, so that works, and that's what we're going to use here. So that's a nice little concise max method, returning the maximum of two doubles. Let us test this. So now that we made modifications to the code, we should recompile the program. So remember, when we started, we compiled the program using Java C, Program1.java, and then we ran it using Java Program1. So now that we made changes to the code, we need to recompile. So if you can use the up arrows to go back to previous commands. So Java C Program1.java, let's enter that. All right, compiles, great. And now let's go to, Okay, enter two numbers. Let's do 5.5 and 4.7. And tells me the maximum of the two numbers is 5.5. So that's good. Okay, let's just try again. Run it one more time. Enter two numbers. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say negative 6.7 and negative 4.3. So the maximum of two numbers is negative 4.3. That's correct, right? That's a larger number. It's a greater number in the number line, right? It's more towards the right. All right, so we're not done with this program yet. What we'd like to do next is do some more stuff where we're going to ask the user. What we're going to do now is generate some random numbers and find the maximum. We first want to ask the user how many numbers they want to generate. Okay, so let's ask the user to tell us the number of integers that we should generate. So I'll say number of integers to generate, and we will say that it has to be at least 10. Sorry, at least 1, because you can't generate 0 numbers, or, well, let's say we're not going to allow generating 0 numbers, or obviously you can't say generate negative 10 numbers. So so at least 1 number and no more than 10 numbers. So we're going to say that we can generate anywhere between 1 and 10 numbers. Okay, so we're going to ask the user, and the user is going to type in their response. So we will say int num integers is going to be assigned sc dot next int. So that's good. And now we have a little thing to worry about, which is, what if the user didn't listen to us, right? What if the user didn't enter a number between 1 and 10? What if they entered a negative number, or 0, or a number greater than 10? So what we're going to have here is, well, one way to do this is to have an if statement, right? So if the number is not valid, then we'll ask the user to try again and enter a new number. Okay, so let's actually write a separate method here to determine if a number is valid. So it's going to be a Boolean method. We'll say is valid. Okay, and it's going to get a number. We'll call it n. And let's just write a little comment here. Determines whether n is valid, that is between 1 and 10 inclusive, right? So it could be 1, it could be 10, and anything in between. Okay, so how are we going to do this? So of course, one way, the easy way to do it maybe is to say if n is greater than or equal to, I can say if n is greater than 0 and n is less than 10, okay, then the number is valid. So then I'll return true. And otherwise, false. Okay, there's actually a much more concise way I can write this method. I can actually get rid of all of this, okay, and just say here, return that. Okay, so what's going on here? So This thing here, which was originally the condition of the if statement, this is really just a Boolean expression. It's a little piece of code. It's an expression that is evaluated as either true or false. And what Java will do here is Java will evaluate it. Java will determine whether it's true or false. And if it's true, Java will have the method return true. And if this expression is false, then Java will have the method return false. So this is very nice and concise, and it's very clear what this method is doing. So just telling, tell me whether n is greater than 0 and n is less than 10. If this entire thing is true, then return true. Otherwise, return false. Okay, so that's very nice. So that tells me if a number is valid. So now I want to know if a number is not valid, then I need to ask the user to enter another number, right? So if not is valid, and then here I'm going to use num integers, right? So that's the number, that's the value that I want to send to the method, right? So if num integers is not valid, right? If the number that the user entered is not valid, then I have to tell the user, try again. And I need to get the new input from the user, right? So I'll say num integers should be sc.nextInt. Now, of course, there's a problem here, right? What if the user once again enters an incorrect number? Right, so let's say the user entered 15 the first time. So we go to this if statement, this condition is true, the number is not valid. Okay, so we tell the user try again. And let's say again they mess up and they enter, let's say, a -5, which is also not valid. So what are we going to do now? Should we have another if statement? And then should we have another? But what if the user enters another incorrect number? Should we have another if statement? And then should we have just an infinite list of if statements? Of course, that's not a great idea. So what is going to work here? What's going to work here is a while loop. So while not is valid num integers, ask user to try again and get the new num integers from the user, and keep doing this as long as this condition is true. And what does this condition say? That the number of integers is not valid. So as long as the number of integers is not valid, try again, tell the user to try again and get the new input from the user. Okay, now I just want to point something out, not really interesting, but notice that here this is called num integers. That's the argument that I'm sending to the method. And then the parameter of the method is called n. Okay, it's totally okay for the argument num integers to have a different name than the parameter of the method. That's totally fine. The way method calling works is that Java makes a copy of this argument, and it sends that copy and it places it into the parameter. So n is a copy of whatever value num integers is. So, but they don't have to have the same name. They could have the same name, but they don't have to have. Okay, so now, what do we know by the time we reach the end of this while loop? Well, when we reach the end of this while loop, we know that the user has entered a valid number, because as long as the user's number is not valid, we are stuck going through the while loop. Okay, so once we finish the while loop, we know that the number is valid. Okay, so now we know that num integers. So we know that it's greater than 0. It's greater than 0, and it is less than or equal to 10. Oh, actually, I made a mistake here. Look at that. There's a bug in my code. Haha. Anyone see the bug? So I told the user this number can be no more than 10, but it could be 10. But here I'm checking that it has to be less than 10. But that's not correct. It has to be less than or equal to 10, right? It could be 10. Could be 10. 10 is a valid number. Okay, so anyways, but now that I fix it, now we know that num integers is greater than 0, right? So n is greater than 0 and is less than or equal to 10. And that's good. It has to be greater than 0, at least 1, meaning greater than 0, and no more than 10. Of course, if I want to, I could say that n is greater than or equal to 1. That also works, right? Greater than 0, since we're only dealing with integers in this particular case. So if I say greater than 0, it's the same thing as saying greater than or equal to 1. If I were dealing with numbers with a decimal point, then they wouldn't necessarily be the same, but okay, great. So okay, good. So now we can generate our random numbers. We know how many random numbers we want to generate. So now we can go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an array to store all those random numbers that we're going to generate. So I'm going to write a method here. Let's see. I'm gonna write a method here named create and fill array. So it's going to look like this: public static, and the method is going to return an array of ints. Okay, and the name of the method is create and fill array, and it's going to get the size that we want. Okay, and what this method is going to do is it will create. So this method creates an array of the specified size. And fills fills it with random integers and returns it. Okay, so that's what this method is going to do. So the first thing we need to do is create the array. We haven't yet created the array. We are told what the size of the array should be, so we're going to use that. It's going to be an array of ints. So int array, whatever we want to call it, equals new. Well, let's call it just, I don't know, whatever we want, integers, we can call it that, equals new int array, and then we have to give the size, which is given to us as a parameter in this case. All right, so very good. So now we have to fill this array with random integers. Well, how are we going to get random integers? So one way to do that is to use a random object. So random, I call it, let's say, generator equals new random. Okay, so we created a random object. We need to import it. So we'll put here import java.util.random. Okay, so now that we have this random object, we can use it. Now we need to fill the entire array. So we're going to use a for loop to go through the array. So I is less than integers dot length. And then we're going to generate a random integer first. So int random int equals, so how do we get a random integer? So we'll use our random number generator, and it has a next int method, which just gives us another random integer. And then we'll take this random int and assign it to an element of the array. So integers at index I is going to be assigned this random int. Okay, so that's what the for loop is going to go through the array and assign a random integer to each element. Once we're done with the for loop, we have gone through the entire array, put in random numbers in each element. So now we can finally return the array. Okay, so that's this create and fill array method. And now we can call this method. So let's go in main and let's try to see how we call this method. So we're going to call the method by saying create and fill array. And what's the size going to be? Well, it's not called size here in main. It's called num integers. Okay. Now this method returns something, returns an array, and I want that array. I want to store that array. So I'll say int array, and I can call it whatever arr equals this. To assign this. Okay. Now I want to print out all these integers. Okay, I want to print them out. So let me say here are the generated numbers or integers. Okay. So I want to print out the integers. In other words, I want to print out the entire array. How am I going to do that? So I can write a separate method for that if I would like. So public static doesn't need to return anything. It's just going to print stuff on the screen, but the method doesn't need to actually return anything. So we'll call it print array, and it is given an array of ints. And it's just going to print out every element of the array. So how do we do that? So just go through the array. Go up to array.length. Okay, so we'll say, so what I want to do is I want to print an element. So I'll say array at index I, and then I want to put a space afterwards so that there's a separation between this element and the next one when they get printed out. And notice I'm printing them all on the same line. I'm using print. So if I wouldn't have this space here, right, if I wouldn't print the space, then all the numbers would be mushed together next to each other, but I don't want that. Okay, now once I'm done printing out all the numbers, I can, if I want to, I can just do system.out.println, line, just go to the next line. Okay, so that's our print array method. So now in main, we need to call that method. So we're going to say print array and send it our array. Okay, now what I would like to do is find the maximum of these random numbers. Okay, so now we're not dealing with two numbers, we're dealing with an array of integers, and I want to find the maximum. Okay, so in other words, what I want to say is int max integer is going to be assigned the max of the array. Okay, so I have to write this max method. I haven't written it yet. And after that, I want to say, I want to just print out the maximum of the integers is, and then I'll print out max integer. Okay, so of course I need to write this max method. Now we already have one max method, but that's okay. You're allowed to have multiple parameter types. Method has two parameters. They're both other method with the same name, a single parameter, and it's going to be of type int array. So here we go. Okay, so this is an example of overloading. Overloading occurs when you have multiple methods in the same class that have the same name. All right, so here we have a max method. Here we have another max method. That's legal as long as they can be differs or the types of their parameters. Okay, so in this case, we can differentiate them either based on the number of parameters or based on the types of parameters. But we don't really need to be able to do both, as long as we can differentiate between them either on the basis of the number of parameters or on the basis of the types of parameters. That's all fine. Anyways, let's write this method. So how do we find the maximum of an array of integers? Okay, so let's first try to do this on the board. So if we have an array of some numbers, okay, so let's say Okay, so this is our array. So of course we have indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so the way we're going to do this, the strategy, the typical strategy is, let's start by guessing that the first element is the maximum. So we'll have, let's say, a variable named largest, and we will initially say, hey, let's guess that it is 3, which is the first element. Now we're not yet done because we haven't gone through the entire array yet. So maybe, in other words, maybe there is something bigger than 3. Okay, so we look at the next element and it's a 7. Hey, is 7 bigger than 3? Yes. So now the largest is no longer 3, but it becomes 7. So we found something bigger than 3. But are we done yet? No. Maybe yes, maybe no, but we can't tell yet because there might be something bigger than that, than 7. So we have to keep going. So we look at the next element of the array. So we look at the 8. Is 8 bigger than 7? Yes. So now the largest is no longer 7, but rather it is 8. So in other words, we have found something larger than the previous largest. Okay, so we move on to the next element. Of course, we might find something bigger. The next element is a 5. Is 5 bigger than 8? No. So okay, so we don't need to do anything here, but we need to go further because maybe there's still a bigger number. The next number is a 9. That is bigger than 8. So now the largest becomes 9. Now we're not yet done because for all we know, there could be a larger number later on. So we haven't yet reached the end of the array. So we have to keep going. So we go to the next element and it's a 2. Is 2 greater than 9? No. Now at this point, we have reached the end of the array. So now whatever number is left in this largest variable is truly the largest, is truly the maximum. Okay, so that's the strategy for finding the maximum in an array. And now we will do that in code. So we will start by saying int largest is going to be assigned array at index 0. And then we're going to have a for loop. So we're going to go through the rest of the array for int I equals 1. So notice here we're starting at index 1, not at 0, because we already looked at index 0. We don't need to look at it again. I is less than array.length plus. All right, and so what do we need to do here? So if we find something bigger than largest, right? So if array at index I is greater than largest, then largest should become our array at index I. And then finally, once we're done going through the entire loop, we can return largest. That's pretty nice. Let's just write a comment for this method. So this method here will returns the maximum of the provided array. Okay. Now, there's a little complication here, which is, what if the array has 0 elements? Now, we know in main, we made sure that there shouldn't be 0 elements, that the user shouldn't enter a number of 0. But for this method itself, we just want to note in the header of the method, in the documentation here, in the comment here at the top of the method, that this method will only work properly if there is at least 1 element in the array. Because what will happen on line 66 if there are no elements in the array? Well, if there are no elements in the array, then there is nothing at array at index 0. There is no element. There is no element 0. There is no element at index 0, I mean, right? There is no element at index 0 if the array has no elements. So what we're going to have is something called a index out of bounds exception. Basically, the program is going to crash because it's not going to be able to access element at index 0 if there are no elements in the array. So in order for this method to work properly, there has to be at least one element in the array. So what I will write here is the following. I will say precondition. Now precondition is something that needs to be true at the beginning of the method in order for the method to work properly. So something that needs to be true, particularly at the beginning of the method, in order for the method to work properly. And for this particular method, the precondition is that arr.length is greater than 0. Because if arr.length is equal to 0, then this method will not work properly. So we'll just state that as a precondition. Okay, again, a precondition is something that needs to be true at the start of the method in order for the method to work properly. All right, so we have our max method. Now here in main, we can call it and we can go ahead and print the maximum. All right, pretty good. So let's go ahead and recompile. Since we made changes to the code, we should recompile. So two numbers, say, okay, so the maximum is 6.7. Now it asks me for how many numbers to generate. So let's test it. Let's say I put in 41. Tells me no, try again. If I put in, let's say, a -8, tells me no, try again. If I put in a 0, tells me try again. If I put in an 11, tells me try again. Okay, but now I'll put in a 4. It's good. And here it gives me the 4 random generated numbers. Notice they're very big. They're just random numbers. Very often, typically they'll be big. And it finds the maximum. Okay, very nice. So that's the program. Nothing really that interesting about it. In fact, it's a very stupid program, but just review some very basic ideas. All right, now we'll have some more programs.